All right, last video was on the weakness of the isolated pawn, and with the emphasis on how to restrain or restrict, fix it, or blockade it, and eventually bring it down in the ensuing strategies involving the attack against the pawn, which often lead to attacks elsewhere. This video, we're going to talk about the strength of the isolated pawn and how to play with it when you have the pawn. And we're going to focus on that side of the ball in this video. So let's get at it. I want to show you some good quality games, and hopefully this helps you out. Knight f6, and I recommend watching the videos more than once so the information can absorb. So d4, knight f6, knight f3, d5. And again, these are all Grandmaster games. I haven't labeled all of them, and I should, because I know some people want to know which games are which. I haven't labeled these, but they all are Grandmaster games from different time periods. I literally have tons of them. Just going through my old archives. Okay, so this game started off in the Queen's Gambit, right? c4. And actually a Nimzo Indian, and then actually let's go back. d4, knight f6. Okay, so it's not a Nimzo Indian per se. Knight f3. There we go. d5. Yeah, I was bugging out. Okay, d5. So we have, just Queen's pawn game. That's what this would be. Now c4. Now it's turned to a Queen's Gambit. And now d takes. c4 has been played. Accepted. e3. And e6. So now we have a Queen's Gambit accepted. Bishop takes c5. c5. Castles. a6. a4. Obviously to stop that. Knight c6. Queen e2. C takes d4. Rook d1. Bishop e7. E takes d4, and there you have it. There is our tabia, so to speak. White has the isolated pawn, and like I said, this time we are going to emphasize the positive side. The last video we looked at basically when things go wrong for the one who has the isolated pawn, and now we're going to look at the bright side. So e takes d4 and castle. And the main outline, basically, when you have that isolated pawn, is activity. You want to be active. You want to keep your pieces on the board for the most part. Of course, you exchange if it leads to some other kind of advantage or win of material, but for the most part, you want to stay active. So you want your pieces placed actively, and you want to um, keep material on the board. You want to control the files next to the isolated or adjacent to the isolated pawn. You want to be able to utilize these outposts, okay? And this is all a consequence of having extra space. Usually the one who has the isolated pawn has extra space. As you see, white occupies the first 4 ranks, whereas black only occupies 3 ranks. And as a consequence of the isolated pawn, piece play and piece placement is no problem for the one who has the isolated pawn. Usually it's easy to freely develop. So he has to use all of these positives in order to generate an attack. Usually the attack comes against the queen side, the king side, and one of the moves that often happen is d5, breaking open the enemy position. So just keep that in mind as we go on. Okay, so in this first game we have e takes d5, castle. And of course, if you saw the other video or know about isolated pawns, black is going to try to basically do the opposite. He wants to trade down pieces. He wants to attack this pawn, tie up white's pieces to the defense of the pawn, right? Thus neutralizing their activity. Eventually win the pawn. If he can't win the pawn, he wants to use the fact that black's pieces are inactive and then try to provoke weakness somewhere in some other sector of the board, attacking those weaknesses back and forth until further weaknesses created. And then sometimes black will, the opponent that doesn't have the isolated pawn will jettison the idea altogether to attack the freshly created weakness. But again, we're concentrating on the white side, or the side that has the isolated pawn. So castle, knight c3, knight d5. So we see this attempt at this blockade here. And we can see already this strategy is a little suspect, because even right here, if white just wanted to just bail out, he could just get rid of the isolate, just change like the structure basically with both sides having an isolated pawn. Of course, that would equalize for black. Okay, so knight d5 is played. Bishop d3. He moves his piece over here to this diagonal. Now knight cb4. This bishop is very important in such positions. The bishop goes back to b1, and usually the white wants to reorganize in such a way where the queen is in front of the bishop in order to attack the king side and provoke weakness over there. Notice before in this particular opening too is that as a result of a4, which was designed to stop the b4 advance, b4 is weak, which allows the knight to post up. Okay, after queen c7, we see knight e5, which is possible as a consequence of this knight being gone from c6. Knight e5 provokes weakness. Right, f6. Now e6 becomes weak. And instead of just moving back, white plays queen h5, threatening the h7 square. And so now we see white's plan is coming to fruition. f5. Now he plays knight takes d5, knight takes d5. And now he plays the move bishop a2. Queen c2. White comes back with queen f3. Gives up the pawn. Queen takes a4. And now bishop takes d5, just giving up the rook. So it's unnecessary. Queen takes a1. He just brought this bishop back. a5. Now he gives up the other rook. He gives up the he forces black to basically give up his queen. Bishop f4. Instead, he plays that, and now the queen is trapped after knight c4. And I'm not going to continue any further with that game. The queen takes b3 had to be played. He gave up his queen, and black struggled on and went on to lose this game. The thing to notice about this game is we see that white strategy prevailed, and that he had the isolated pawn. He utilized the outpost, one of them being e5, which you see the knight sitting up there, and he was able to get his attack in on the queen side. He provoked weakness from white, provoked weakness from black, which is a major theme in it, and he was able for the most part to preserve the pieces on the board. He utilized his extra space in the position to keep black pretty much inactive. Okay, black failed in his objective to um, try to um, tie up white's pieces with the attack on the isolated pawn. He blockaded the isolated pawn, but he didn't attack it. So white had no obligation to really protect it. All he did was place his rook on d1, and without being tied up, his pieces were able to basically run wild, and that's what happened. We see that white did not have to worry one iota about the protection of the D pawn at any point, and he was just able to run wild and free with this attack. Let's look at another one here. This time coming from the English, and now we have a transposition into what I believe is the Caro-Kann. E takes, C takes. Okay, Queen D8 and D4. So isolated pawn in this position comes up every now and then, especially if somebody is a devotee to the Caro-Kann and they try to play C6 against everything. Sometimes you'll see C4, C6, and then the person to play E4. And we can see right here, black has a solid position, right? It's just that he has to be worried about the space and development. But if you play a Caro-Kann, you're really not worried about space too much. You like these kind of positions. So D4, knight F6, knight F3, E6, bishop D3, bishop E7, bishop G5 is played, castle for black. We see already the same thing with the bishop dropping back so the queen can get in front. Knight C6 at some point. So A3 is played, B6, Queen D3, real primitive tactic to remove the knight, checkmate after that. G6, there's the provocation of the weakness. And now with something to bite on, H4 is played. A5, H5, and the purpose of A5 is to bring the bishop out to A6. So Queen D2, Queen C7, and then H takes and F takes, and it's already looking brutal for black here. Bishop B3, knight D8, and white played Queen E3 here, and bishop C4. So black wants to trade here, but tactically it does not work out because of this right here. Bishop takes, queen takes, and knight E5 again using the outpost. Queen went back to A6. And here black played bishop white played bishop H6. Queen H3 is just as effective. Bishop H6. Rook E8. Queen G3, and now we have sacrificial themes against G6. Bishop D6, utilizing the pin here. So he merely frees himself by playing bishop F5. Queen G6, attacking this piece is much stronger. That practically forces this move, whereby black would be losing. And black is still busted here. But he plays bishop F4. He took anyway. Got the attack here on this knight on F6. And knight D7. Queen H4. Queen is been abandoned. Knight F8. And this is real just straightforward. Queen f6, and black just resigned. Again, we see the same type of pattern, format, same symptoms in the position that lead to this destruction of black, and we see the same outcome. Again, the utilization of the e5 outpost. We see the same setup with the bishop and queen, and we see the same provocation of weakness on the queen side, and then, excuse me, on the king side, and then the subsequent attack by white over there in that sector of the board. We also see black's lack of attack against the d4 isolated pawn. So basically, what we're seeing is white getting all the benefits of the isolated pawn without the drawbacks. In other words, black is not putting any kind of pressure on the isolated pawn where white has to devote any of his pieces to trying to protect it. And this is one of the major themes that black has in its favor. You have to attack that pawn and allow to get white to try to tie up his pieces. If you don't tie up white's pieces, he just has space and activity for nothing. And that's what we saw in these first two games. Let's look at another one. Okay. So d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3. Okay. This is often played to try to avoid the exchange variation that often would occur here. And leave Iranian plays this way. So now that if c takes, there is no bishop g5 because the knight isn't here. So often the bishop might go here, or knight f3 is played. Okay, so anyway, after bishop e7, knight f3, knight f6, bishop g5, castle, e3, there's h6, bishop h4, b6, and this is known as your, I think it's, yeah, your Tartakower Makaganov Bondaresky variation, or TMB for short. Used to just be called the Tartakower variation. Okay, which is highlighted by this move. So c takes d5, and black, when he indicates that he's about to fianchetto, white takes here and usually tries to get black to basically block his own idea by blocking the bishop. And so c takes d5, knight takes d5 is played. Some trades happen. Bishop takes, queen takes, knight takes d5, e takes d5. Okay, and usually this is normal in this structure that black takes on hanging pawns, and hanging pawns are similar to isolated pawns, except there's two pawns together. But usually hanging pawns usually turn into isolated pawns at some point, and we're going to see that. So knight takes d5, e takes d5, rook c1. This is all normal, attacking on the c file. Bishop e6, queen a4. White tries to take advantage of the light square weaknesses. c5. So black's game is based on activity here. Queen a3. Again, this is all normal. This is all theory. Rook to c8. Bishop b5 again. The idea focusing on the light squares. Queen b7. D takes, B takes, and now we see the hanging pawns appear on the board. Rook takes c5. Rook takes c5, and queen takes c5. So we see that white has just won a pawn, so it's kind of like, well, hey, what's going on here? And he has an isolated pawn to boot. So if we were able to fast forward to the end game, getting rid of all the heavy pieces, white being a pawn up with a pristine pawn structure, wins this, 90 out of 100 times. However, we still have the middle game to deal with, and this pawn sacrifice allows black to become active here. So knight a6, bishop takes, and now queen a6. So now we see somebody has trouble with their king protection. Queen a3, white is willing to take on double pawns in order to secure the right to castle. Black plays queen c4, king d2. So he says, all right, I'm going to just bring my rook out like this. Queen g4, it's probing the position. And notice the theme again being activity. This time, of course, as you can see, is black with the isolated pawn. And the theme is activity and pressure on the position. Because if you don't do that, then white can just settle down and attack all the weaknesses here. So queen g4. What do we have now? Rook g1, protecting the pawn, and you should be able to tell that that's ugly move to have to make. d4. So we see another theme that has not yet been introduced, and that's the idea of liberating the position by just getting rid of the weakness. So you're striving for activity, but if you can get rid of the d pawn, the isolated pawn, by all means, do it. And usually, this definitely shows that the player that had the isolated pawn is now better, because he has had the best of both worlds. He has activated his pieces, and he's getting rid of the weakness at the same time. So why does he do that? Well, after knight takes d4, his idea is to play queen h4 with a double attack here. He's threatening check and winning the rook, and he's threatening the h3 pawn. So rook e1 is played. Queen takes f2 check, and now the tables have turned, and it is white who has the troubled pawn structure. Queen f2, queen f1, knight takes, f takes, queen d6, king h8, e4, and rook c8. King e3, and rook f8. And just suffices to say that black was able to go on and win that game due to a blunder that white had made. Right now, black is not totally winning here, and white is not totally lost, but with this king, you can see how possibly in a time scramble or something like that, or just an oversight, how he quickly wound up getting into a bad position. But that game illustrates the point of black being in possession of the isolated pawn, and how he has to be willing to play in order to wrest the initiative from white. Okay, you can't be afraid to sacrifice and play dynamically in such positions, because this position right here, just looking at it from a static point of view, is good for white, and therefore black shows the way here, and that you have to be willing to play dynamically in order to take advantage in this position. This is exactly what black did here. Okay, again, white was not able to put any pressure on the D pawn, and white and black was able to basically again run free in the position. I'll show you one more because I think that the point has been emphasized here. So D4, knight F6, C4, E6, knight to F3, D5, knight C3, bishop E7, bishop G5, castle, E3, knight BD7, rook C1, C6, bishop D3, D takes, bishop C4, knight D5. Okay, you have this Lasker variation of the Queen's Gambit. Decline, Queen E7, castle, and then knight takes, rook takes, E5, and this is one of the real old Queen's Gambit lines. Queen C2, E takes, knight F6, and black seems just to be cruising along. But again, he just has this problem where white has a little more space and he has this lead in development. It's hard for black to get his pieces out, right? Although he's he's pretty solid here, it's hard for him to extract himself fully from the difficulties that he possesses. So we see here, we see the isolated pawn arise, but since there's not any pressure on that pawn from black really, white is kind of free to basically utilize the pluses in this position. Again, he has these outposts, pieces are on strong squares. Okay, if you're black here, you want those pieces on defensive duty, right? Trying to hold that E pawn, but instead it's the opposite. The D pawn is just there as a positive in this position, and we see that one of the reasons why you don't really see this line too much. This is a difficult position to play for black. Queen D8, H3, just making sure this guy doesn't get out. Knight D5, oh, there's like a nominal blockade. Bishop takes D5, just tough move. If he takes with the C pawn, then you got penetration up here. So he has to take with the queen. And I said in earlier video that the queen is not really a legit, not a legit blockader of the pawn. You don't want a high-ranking piece blockading because it's easy to to remove the piece. For instance, if the rook comes and attacks on C5, then the queen has to move away because the queen is just too valuable. So that's that's pretty much a no-no right there. So this is what happens after rook C5. He has to give up the blockade. Notice again the use of the outpost. This time it's C5. Okay. Next move. Boom. Kingside attack. You see, so it's the same themes over and over. G6. What's this theme? The provocation of weakness. Okay. Okay. Now what do we have here? So 19 G6. Hold on, I think I made a mistake. Let me go back. I'm sorry. Because I could just end it and be like, well, white went on to win. But let me just get the right position here. So queen takes, castle. I missed a important move here. Knight C3, right? Rook C3. E5, queen C2, E takes, knight F6, rook E1. I did that. Queen D8, H3, Knight D. Aha. See, I had played rook C5. I apologize. The move was rook, not rook E6 either. The move was rook E5. Sorry about that. Had an oversight. But again, using the outpost, I had put the rook on C5, but the E5 outpost was used. Now, again, if there was a knight here, there's no problems. But since it's a high-ranking queen, high-ranking official, that's the go. And now we have it correct. Knight G5. Okay, and this makes it even worse because this rook's on the third rank, patrolling. Boom. Now we have the provocation of weakness. Okay. Plays rook F3 here. Let's go back. And notice how white just abandons, just jettisons the pawn. Like, hey, take it. Okay, because white has full compensation if that pawn is grabbed. It's not really a good look. He goes for F6. And this loses on the spot. Queen B3. Again, new weaknesses formed. King G7. And then real strong move that black probably overlooked. Here's rook E8. And the idea, of course, is if he's to take here, then you have this queen F7 crashing in, and that's going to lead to mate. So instead, he just threw caution to the wind and played A5. And then this move is pretty stiff. He moves the bishop. So that's gone. And then black resigned. So there's really no way out of this. If he plays rook FC8, then again, same thing. Queen takes F7. If he plays this rook, then queen takes B7, rook C7, and then you get the fork after this. So there was no sense in fighting on there. So just another devastating win with the white pieces. But again, I think that that the point is emphasized, basically how to conduct the game when you have the isolated pawn, what you should be trying to do. And basically, again, the antithesis to that is how not to play it with the black pieces. So again, this is an old line, and we see why it's not really played that much anymore, because black's difficulties had not been solved adequately. There's many little subtleties here, but this is the basic idea. It's just this attack, kind of repeats itself. But again, each position is going to be different. There's going to be little tactical nuances, but just know that if I have the isolated pawn, I want to play active. The idea of reversing, putting the queen, bishop on B1 or C2 and putting the queen in front of it on D3. The rook's coming to the third rank. Rook's also utilizing the E file, the E and C files. The use of the outpost that's created on E5 and C5. The utilization of knight G5 and the provocation of weaknesses on the queen side, whether you could get black to play H6 or G6 or F5 or something like that. Recognize those themes, and then often the successful conduct of a king side attack. And just for good measure, I'm gonna throw this last one in there at you real fast. C4, E6, knight F3, D5, D4, knight F6, bishop g5, bishop e7, knight c3, castle, e3, knight b d7, bishop to d3, c5, castle. Black takes first. Black decides, I don't want the isolated pawn. You take it. E takes. White says fine. D takes. Bishop takes. Knight b6. Bishop here. And again, it's for the fight for this square. Okay. Black has his pieces lined up all to stop this potential advance in the center, because that's the first step in dealing with an isolated pawn. And again, see my videos on isolated pawn as a weakness. The first step is the restraining aspect, right? Restrain, blockade, right? So this is restrain, and blockade would be actually putting a piece there and then destroying the pawn. So bishop b3, bishop d7, queen d3, and we see white going with his plan, right? Knight b d5, so there's the blockade aspect. Knight e5. You see how you see the ideas in collision. Black's going along with his plan, white's going along with his plan. White is trying to set up an attack. White is using the positive aspects of the position. Okay, now here's the downside that I'm looking at right now for black. Is black, although he has the pawn blockaded, right? There's no pressure on the pawn. So therefore, white's pieces aren't tied up. That's a very important aspect in defeating the position, in winning in the position where the opponent has an isolated queen's pawn. It's tying the pieces down. Okay, so he has the pawn blockaded, but there's no attack going on against the D pawn. Period. This allows the freedom of white's pieces, right? Okay, it's like wild horses. So knight e5, bishop c6, rook a d1, knight b4, queen h3, bishop d5. It's a powerful piece. Knight takes d5, knight b takes d5. Now he plays f5 there with this, f4 with the idea of f5. Another move, good move, is bishop c2. Okay, so two good moves. So f4, because of course he would like to open up the f file, because in order to really have this plan succeed, he have to be able to take both knights out of the picture. So that's what basically is going on there. So f4, rook c8, which see, rook c8 is a tough move because it's a good move, but it's kind of ignoring what's going on in the position. I mean, f5 is screaming to be played here. So black needs to play against this idea, but it's hard to play against the idea. I mean, you could try to play queen b6, but still f5 probably comes crashing through. Right? You wish you could have a piece here, so that, for instance, hey, having the bishop here, so that when f5 is played, you can whip it off. So it's kind of rough at this point for black. So rook c8 is played, f5. Now black should be trying to trade pieces, so maybe knight e4 here. This attack on the bishop. But again, it's a rough looking position here. Instead, he plays this move here. E takes f5. To me, this helps white because it opens up this f file, right? And you have all this pressure down the f file here. So rook takes f5. He plays queen d6, and there's the bolt of lightning right there. And with this file, with the F file, F7 sacrifice, this bishop, becomes really strong like overnight. Rook takes, so bishop takes, and boom, this is hurtful and inconsiderate. Queen c6, and this is just brutal. All types of pain and agony right now. If queen takes d6, then this guy, you know, this is just bad for black. So queen d6. I'm sorry, rook takes d6. So queen e8, and then a powerful move, this rook d7, pin him and win him. And black again had to resign. So again, I hope you enjoyed that video. Hope you learn something about the isolated pawn. I suggest watching this video a couple of times in conjunction with the other video, because this video is about the strength of the isolated pawn. And before you get too, hyped up on that and say, yeah, I'm going to start playing isolated pawn positions, look at the negative side of the isolated pawn, when it goes wrong. And then see, if you want to, play those positions or not, because it's not always pretty, like this. So again, please like and subscribe, comment, and I'll get back to you. And I'll see you on my next video.